In section 6 here of unit 3, we're going to talk about complex numbers. Now, it's possible when you solve equations to get non-real answers. We call them imaginary solutions, and we'll look at that as we get to the quadratics unit next. Basically what a complex number is, we'll define a few things for you here first. A complex number is a number of the form a plus bi. We've got a real part and an imaginary part. So let's just give you an example of this first. So for instance, I have a plus bi. I'm going to make that a little bit thicker here. So if I have a plus bi, so like 3 plus 2i. This is called the real part of a complex number, the thing that doesn't have the I in it. This is called the imaginary part. Okay, some definitions of I, and you learned about these in Intermediate Algebra 1 a little bit, getting non-real solutions, and it comes into play, like I said, especially with quadratics. Some things that we have to define here for you. I is equal to the square root of -1. Thus, I squared, if I imagine squaring both sides there, is equal to -1. And we're going to use that as we simplify square roots that have negatives underneath them, powers of I, and as we get into operations with complex numbers. So let's go down here. Okay, so like I said, you need to remember those two things. And when we go down here, we will do number 2 first. Okay. Square root of -36. If I try to type that in my calculator would give me an error message because you can't do the square root of -36. But right away when you see the negative sign on there, right here, that tells you you're going to have an I on your answer. So really, that's like -1 times 36, and I really have the square root of each of them. Well, the square root of -1 is I. So I pull an I out, and it's times the square root of whatever's left on that number part. Now, 36 is a perfect square. It is 6 times 6, so I would pull a 6 out. So the square root of -36, simplified, is 6i. Now, if we go down a little bit further here, let's go down to where we're multiplying two things first. Okay, and we will do let's do number 8 here. Okay. Now, you cannot, when we multiplied radicals last unit, earlier this unit, we could multiply the two things underneath. You have to pull out your i's if it's a negative square root first. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull out the square root on this first, and I'm going to write this as I square root 24. That takes care of that, pulls it out, puts an I out in front. And I'm going to do the same thing over there with the 8. I'm going to pull an I out, and it's square root of 8. Now, if you wanted to, you could break down 24, pull out perfect squares. In fact, let's do that because otherwise we'd have to multiply these two numbers and it gets to be a bigger number. So there's some different ways you can do this, but let's break down 24. So if I broke down 24, because I could simplify the square root 24 part, it's 2 times 12, and then it's 2 times 6, and 2 times 3. So notice I got a pair of 2's, and I got that 2 and a 3 left to put back underneath. So I'm going to pull a 2 out, so I have 2i. And then I have the 2 and the 3 to put back underneath here, which would be square root 6. And usually we put the 2 out in front of the I that's out in front with 8. That's 2 times 4, 2 times 2. I'm going to pull out a 2, so that's going to be times 2i. And then this 2 has to go back underneath the radical. So now I'm going to multiply my things that are out front. 2i times 2i, because it's times in between here, is 4i squared, and then I have square root 6 times square root 2, which is square root 12. Now, if you want to change, I squared is equal to -1, so this really is 4 times -1 out in front, which is -4, square root 12. But now we have to say, can I simplify what's under the radical? Well, if I break 12 down, 12 is 3 times 4, 2 times 2, got a pair of 2's, so I'm going to pull that out into 2 radical 3. And then I have this -4 out in front, so these two have to get multiplied together. It's -8 radical 3.